The night sky over Louisville, Kentucky erupted into a horrific fireball as UPS Flight 2976 slammed into the ground just short of the runway. In an instant, a routine cargo flight transformed into one of the most shocking aviation disasters in recent history. The McDonnell Douglas MD-11 freighter, a workhorse of global shipping, disintegrated on impact, scattering burning wreckage across the approach path to Louisville International Airport. First responders, rushing to the scene, were met with an inferno of jet fuel and cargo. None of the 3 crew members survived. What happened in those final moments would ultimately expose a deadly secret that had been lurking within the MD-11 fleet for decades. Mayday, 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 UPS 2976. We're experiencing severe control difficulties, attempting to maintain. These were the last words transmitted by Captain Michael Hendricks before all communication ceased. The time was 3:42 a.m. on November 17, 2025. Just 4 minutes earlier, the flight had been on a perfectly normal approach, with Louisville's familiar runway lights visible through light rain. Then, without warning, what should have been a routine landing became a desperate fight for survival. The aircraft's final descent wasn't just steep, it was nearly vertical. Security cameras from nearby warehouses captured the MD-11's lights descending at an impossible angle before disappearing behind a tree line, followed by a massive explosion that turned night into day. The impact crater was 15 feet deep. Parts of the massive cargo jet were found almost half a mile from the main crash site. The violence of the impact told investigators immediately that this was no ordinary accident. As dawn broke over the crash site, NTSB investigators were already en route from Washington. What they didn't know yet was that they were about to uncover one of the most alarming aircraft design flaws ever to slip through the certification process. A flaw that had remained hidden for the aircraft's entire 35-year service history. The MD-11 has long been considered temperamental by pilots. First entering service in 1990 as a stretched, modernized version of the DC-10, it developed a reputation for being unforgiving during landing. But it was also renowned for reliability and efficiency, which made it particularly valuable for cargo operations long after passenger airlines had retired their fleets. The aircraft involved in the crash, registration number N578UP, had been flying for 27 years, starting its career with Swiss Air before being converted to cargo service for UPS in 2009. This aircraft had over 8600 flight hours, explains Dr. Eleanor Martinez, former NTSB investigator and aviation safety expert. That's equivalent to nearly 10 years of continuous flying. But age alone doesn't explain catastrophic failure. Commercial aircraft are designed to operate safely for decades with proper maintenance, and this particular MD-11 had undergone a major inspection just 2 weeks before the crash. The investigation began where all aviation disaster inquiries do, with the recovery of the black boxes. Despite extensive fire damage to much of the wreckage, both the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder were recovered intact. What they revealed stunned even veteran investigators. The voice recording captured increasing alarm in the cockpit as the crew battled with increasingly unresponsive flight controls. "Something's wrong with pitch control," First Officer Sarah Chen can be heard saying, followed by the sound of multiple warning alarms. Captain Hendricks is heard instructing Engineer Martinez to run the emergency checklist for flight control failure. Their voices remain professional, methodical, even as the situation deteriorates. But the data told an even more disturbing story. The flight data recorder showed that despite correct inputs from the pilots, the elevators, critical control surfaces on the tail that control the aircraft's pitch, were not responding properly. In the final 90 seconds, the aircraft entered a pitch oscillation that rapidly became uncontrollable, eventually nosing down at a rate that made recovery impossible. "What we're seeing isn't pilot error," explained NTSB Chair Thomas Blackwood during the preliminary findings briefing. "We're seeing a catastrophic failure of the flight control system that gave the crew virtually no chance of recovery, despite their textbook response to the emergency." 3 weeks after the crash, in a press conference that sent shockwaves through the aviation industry, the NTSB revealed their preliminary findings. They had discovered microscopic fractures in key components of the MD-11's hydraulic elevator control system. Fractures that had developed slowly over decades of service, invisible to routine inspections. These fractures, located in a critical junction where the 3 redundant hydraulic systems converge, created a single point of failure in a system specifically designed to prevent such occurrences. "What makes this particularly alarming," Blackwood continued, "is that we've identified at least 7 previous incidents with MD-11 aircraft over the past 5 years that exhibited similar control anomalies. In those cases, the crews were fortunate enough to recover control, and the incidents were classified as minor or attributed to environmental factors. We now believe these were warning signs of the same underlying design flaw." The revelation stunned the aviation community. How could such a fundamental flaw exist in an aircraft design that had been flying for over 3 decades? The answer lies in the complex interaction between design limitations, aging, and regulatory oversight. The MD-11's hydraulic control system was designed with triple redundancy, 3 separate systems that should prevent total failure if 1 or even 2 systems malfunction. But the NTSB discovered that under specific conditions of temperature cycling and mechanical stress, microscopic cracks could develop at a critical junction point where elements of all 3 systems were in close proximity. Over decades, these cracks could propagate until reaching catastrophic failure, a scenario the original designers had never anticipated for aircraft they expected to have a service life of 20-25 years. "We're seeing the consequences of operating aging aircraft well beyond their originally projected service lives," explains Dr. James Chen, professor of aerospace engineering at MIT. When the MD-11 was designed in the 1980s, the analytical tools to predict how materials would behave after 30-plus years of cyclic stresses simply weren't as sophisticated as they are today. Some failure modes only become apparent after decades of real-world operation. Within hours of the NTSB announcement, the Federal Aviation Administration issued an emergency airworthiness directive grounding all MD-11 aircraft in U.S. registries and calling for immediate specialized inspections. Aviation authorities worldwide quickly followed suit. Overnight, a vital component of the global cargo network was removed from service, with potentially massive implications for supply chains already stressed by seasonal holiday demands. For the families of Captain Hendricks, First Officer Chen, and Flight Engineer Martinez, the findings offered a measure of clarity, if not comfort. "My wife was one of the most skilled pilots I knew," said David Chen, husband of First Officer Sarah Chen. "Knowing that nothing she could have done would have saved that flight helps in some ways, but makes the loss even more senseless in others. This never should have happened." If you want to understand the full implications of this tragedy and what it means for aviation safety moving forward, subscribe to this channel right now and hit the notification bell. In the coming segments, we'll dive deeper into the MD-11's troubled history, examine how critical flaws can remain hidden for decades, and explore what this means for the future of aircraft certification and inspection. The crash of UPS Flight 2976 isn't just a tragic accident. It's a watershed moment that exposes the dangerous gap between what we think we know about aircraft safety and what may be lurking beneath the surface of even the most thoroughly tested designs. And as we'll discover, the warning signs were there all along, hidden in plain sight for anyone who knew where to look. The MD-11 that crashed in Louisville had a history stretching back to 1998, when it first flew for Swissair as a passenger aircraft. After 12 years of passenger service, it was converted to a freighter, a common practice that extends the economic life of commercial aircraft. By November 2025, N578UP had logged over 86,000 flight hours across more than 14,000 individual flights. But this particular aircraft wasn't unique. It was representative of an aging global fleet of MD-11s, with the youngest examples being over 22 years old. Cargo carriers often operate aircraft longer than passenger airlines, explains aviation analyst Rebecca Washington. The economics make sense. The conversion cost is justified by years of additional service. And cargo doesn't care about the latest cabin amenities or fuel efficiency improvements that drive passenger fleet renewals. What makes the Louisville disaster particularly disturbing is the timeline of previous incidents that, in retrospect, pointed to the underlying problem. NTSB investigators uncovered a pattern that stretched back years, a trail of breadcrumbs that might have prevented tragedy if properly connected. In March 2021, a FedEx MD-11 experienced what the crew described as uncommanded pitch oscillations during approach to Memphis. The crew managed to regain control and land safely. The incident was attributed to possible wake turbulence from a preceding aircraft. In December 2023, a Lufthansa cargo MD-11 reported similar control difficulties while approaching Frankfurt. Again, the crew recovered, and the incident was classified as minor. By September 2024, just 2 months before the Louisville crash, another UPS MD-11 experienced momentary loss of pitch authority during descent into Anchorage. The aircraft landed without further incident, and maintenance checks revealed no obvious issues. When we examined these incidents collectively rather than individually, a clear pattern emerged, says NTSB investigator Dr. Sofia Rodriguez. Each involved MD-11 aircraft with more than 70 UDRUZRO flight hours. Each occurred during the approach phase, when elevator control inputs are most active, and each exhibited similar symptoms of pitch control irregularities. The crucial question is why these warning signs weren't connected earlier. Part of the answer lies in the fragmented nature of aviation incident reporting across different carriers and countries. Another factor was the success of the crews in managing these incidents. Paradoxically, their skill in recovering from dangerous situations may have masked the severity of the underlying problem. The NTSB's metallurgical analysis of the recovered hydraulic components revealed the smoking gun. Microscopic stress fractures in a critical junction area where hydraulic lines for the elevator control systems pass through a common support structure. This area experiences constant vibration, pressure cycling, and temperature fluctuations during normal operation. Over tens of thousands of flight hours, these conditions created metal fatigue that slowly propagated through the material. What makes this particularly alarming is that this junction was designed with triple redundancy. 3 separate hydraulic systems that should prevent total failure if 1 or even 2 systems malfunction. The MD-11's designers never anticipated that all 3 systems could be compromised simultaneously by cracks originating from the same structural stress point. This is what we call a common mode failure, explains Dr. Marcus Johnson, professor of aerospace engineering at Georgia Tech. It's the Achilles heel of redundant systems. If your backup systems can be taken out by the same factor that compromises your primary system, then redundancy gives you a false sense of security. Equally troubling was the discovery that standard maintenance inspections couldn't detect these fractures. They occurred in an area that required special equipment to access, and the fractures themselves were often too small to see without microscopic examination. The maintenance protocols developed when the MD-11 was certified simply didn't anticipate this specific failure mode. As news of the NTSB's findings spread, cargo airlines worldwide scrambled to implement emergency inspections of their MD-11 fleets. Within days, similar fractures were discovered in 5 other aircraft, all with more than 75 000 flight hours. Each was immediately removed from service. For the shipping industry, the timing couldn't have been worse. The November crash came at the beginning of the holiday shipping season, when cargo capacity is already stretched to its limits. With dozens of MD-11 freighters suddenly grounded worldwide, companies like UPS, FedEx, and Lufthansa Cargo faced significant challenges in maintaining their delivery commitments. The MD-11 makes up approximately 15% of our long-haul cargo capacity, acknowledged UPS CEO Jennifer Barnes in an emergency investor call. We're implementing contingency plans, including activating retired aircraft and leasing additional capacity, but there will be impacts on our service levels during this critical period. The Louisville crash has exposed a disturbing blind spot in aviation safety. What happens when aircraft operate decades beyond their originally intended service lives? The MD-11's designers at McDonnell Douglas, now part of Boeing, anticipated a service life of approximately 20 to 25 years. Yet many of these aircraft have now been flying for over 30 years, with converted freighters expected to continue operating well into the 2030s. We're in uncharted territory with aging aircraft, says Dr. Eleanor Martinez. The aviation industry has excellent data on how aircraft components perform during their designed service life, but much less certainty about what happens beyond that horizon. This disaster suggests we need to fundamentally rethink how we certify, inspect, and maintain aircraft that operate in this extended twilight period. The investigation has revealed that the specific failure mode in the MD-11's hydraulic control system involves a phenomenon engineers call thermal cycling fatigue. Each flight cycle subjects aircraft components to extreme temperature variations, from the heat of takeoff and climbing to the sub-zero temperatures at cruising altitude, back to warmer temperatures during descent. Over thousands of cycles, these temperature fluctuations can cause microscopic changes in metal structures that eventually develop into cracks. What's particularly insidious about this type of failure, explains metallurgist Dr. Jamal Washington, is that it develops so gradually that it's nearly impossible to detect through conventional inspection methods until it's almost at the point of failure. The cracks propagate from the inside out, often hidden from visual inspection. The NTSB's laboratory analysis of the recovered hydraulic components showed that the initial microfractures likely began forming after approximately 60 flight hours, well beyond the testing parameters used when the aircraft was originally certified. By the time of the crash, these fractures had propagated to critical size, affecting all 3 supposedly redundant hydraulic systems. Remarkably, the investigation uncovered internal memos from McDonnell Douglas dating back to 1995 that identified potential concerns about this specific area of the hydraulic system. Engineers had noted that the junction point where all 3 systems passed through a common support structure represented a theoretical vulnerability. However, the probability of simultaneous failure was calculated to be so remote that it was deemed an acceptable risk. These calculations, however, were based on the aircraft's original projected service life, not the extended decades of use that would follow. What we're seeing is a cascading failure of imagination, says former FAA Inspector Thomas Reardon. The designers couldn't envision these aircraft flying for 30-plus years. The regulators didn't require testing beyond the intended service life. The maintenance programs weren't designed to catch failure modes that emerge only after decades, and the incident reporting system didn't connect the dots between similar events across different operators. For the families of the Louisville crash victims, these revelations have transformed grief into anger. At recent NTSB public hearings, relatives demanded accountability from both the manufacturer and regulators. My husband survived 3 combat deployments as a military pilot, only to die because someone decided that a known risk was acceptable, said Elena Hendricks, widow of Captain Michael Hendricks. Who exactly accepted this risk? Certainly not the crews who trusted their aircraft to be safe. In a particularly emotional moment, Robert Martinez Sr., father of flight engineer Robert Martinez, addressed the board directly. My son was the first in our family to go to college. Aviation was his dream from childhood. He trusted the system, the inspections, the regulations, the redundancies. That system failed him completely. The human cost extends beyond the 3 crew members. First Officer Sarah Chen left behind 2 teenage children. Captain Hendricks had been planning his retirement for the following year. Flight engineer Martinez had recently become engaged. Their loss has created ripples of grief throughout the close-knit aviation community in Louisville, where UPS employs thousands at its global air hub. The investigation has prompted uncomfortable questions throughout the aviation industry. How many other aging aircraft types might harbor similar hidden vulnerabilities? Are current inspection regimes sufficient to detect problems that emerge only after decades of service? Does the regulatory framework need to be updated to address the realities of aircraft operating well beyond their originally certified service lives? This is potentially just the tip of the iceberg, warns aerospace safety consultant Captain James Wilson. We have hundreds of aircraft flying today that are approaching or exceeding their original design lifespans. Each represents thousands of components that may be subject to aging mechanisms we don't fully understand yet. If you're finding this analysis valuable, take a moment right now to like this video and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your engagement helps us continue producing this kind of in-depth investigative content. As investigators continue their painstaking analysis of the Louisville crash, one thing has become painfully clear. The aviation industry's stellar safety record may have created a dangerous complacency about aging aircraft. The warning signs were there, hidden in maintenance logs, incident reports, and engineering analyses. But it took a catastrophic failure and the loss of 3 dedicated professionals to finally connect the dots. The investigation into UPS Flight 2976 has expanded beyond the immediate cause of the crash to examine the entire certification, operation, and maintenance ecosystem for aging aircraft. What they've uncovered suggests systemic blind spots that could affect dozens of aircraft types still in service worldwide. The MD-11 case study reveals a dangerous gap in our safety net, explains NTSB Chair Blackwood. We have robust processes for certifying new aircraft and for monitoring safety early in their service lives. But as aircraft age beyond their original design parameters, our systems become increasingly reliant on reactive rather than proactive measures. The technical investigation has uncovered 4 critical factors that combine to create the conditions for disaster. Each represents a potential lesson that could save lives in the future. First, the investigation revealed that the standard maintenance inspection protocols for the MD-11 never anticipated the specific failure mode that downed Flight 2976. The critical junction where the hydraulic lines pass through a common support structure was considered a lifed component, meaning it was designed to last the entire service life of the aircraft without replacement. As a result, detailed inspections of this area weren't required during regular maintenance checks. It's a classic case of we don't look because we don't expect to find anything, says maintenance specialist Richard Torres. The inspection regimes were designed around known failure modes at the time of certification, not emerging ones that develop only after decades of service. Second, the redundancy in the hydraulic system, considered a critical safety feature, actually masked the developing problem. Because all three systems remained functional until the point of catastrophic failure, there were no warning signs that would trigger maintenance action. The systems passed their regular operational checks because the fractures hadn't yet propagated to the point of leakage or performance degradation. Third, the investigation uncovered that the flight control computer on the MD-11 wasn't programmed to detect subtle asymmetries in hydraulic system performance that might have indicated developing problems. Modern fly-by-wire aircraft have much more sophisticated monitoring systems that can detect minute discrepancies before they become dangerous. The MD-11 represents a transitional generation of aircraft, explains avionics engineer Dr. Patricia Nakamura. It has computerized systems, but they're not as integrated or sophisticated as what we see in aircraft designed 10-15 years later. Today's aircraft would likely detect these anomalies much earlier. Fourth, and perhaps most concerning, the investigation found that information about previous incidents wasn't being shared effectively across the industry. The uncommanded pitch oscillations experienced by other MD-11s were categorized under different reporting codes by different operators. Without standardized terminology and centralized analysis, the pattern remained invisible until after the Louisville crash. The most startling revelation came from comparative testing conducted by the NTSB. When they subjected similar hydraulic components from newer aircraft types to accelerated aging tests mimicking 80-00+ flight hours, they discovered that modern materials and design approaches were much more resistant to the kind of thermal cycling fatigue that doomed the MD-11. But because certification standards don't require testing to these extreme lifespans, this safety margin was essentially accidental rather than mandated. "We've been lucky," admits former Boeing engineer Sarah Williams. "Modern aircraft are inherently more resistant to these aging mechanisms, but that's largely a byproduct of advances in materials science and manufacturing techniques, not because regulations specifically require it." In response to these findings, the FAA has formed a special task force on extended service life aircraft. Their mandate is to develop new certification requirements, inspection protocols, and monitoring systems specifically for aircraft operating beyond their originally intended service lives. Similar initiatives are underway at the European Union Aviation Safety Agency and other regulatory bodies worldwide. For cargo carriers, the immediate challenge is determining when or if their MD-11 fleets can safely return to service. The specialized inspections now required are time-consuming and expensive, involving partial disassembly of critical components. Early results suggest that approximately 30% of MD-11s with more than 70 zero flight hours show early signs of the same fatigue fractures that downed Flight 2976. We're facing difficult decisions about the economic viability of these aircraft going forward, admits cargo airline executive Marcus Johnson. The MD-11 has been the backbone of our long-haul fleet, but if each aircraft requires major structural work every few thousand hours, the economics no longer make sense. For aviation enthusiasts, the MD-11's troubles represent the potential end of an era. The distinctive Triget, with its graceful winglets and imposing size, may disappear from the skies sooner than expected. Another iconic aircraft design relegated to aviation history. 6 months after the Louisville disaster, the aviation industry is still coming to terms with its implications. The immediate crisis has been addressed. All MD-11 aircraft worldwide have undergone specialized inspections, with nearly a third permanently grounded after showing signs of similar fatigue fractures. But the broader questions about aging aircraft safety remain at the forefront of industry discussions. The final NTSB report on Flight 2976, released last week, doesn't just close the book on this specific accident, it opens a new chapter in how we approach aircraft longevity. The 324-page document contains 28 specific recommendations that could fundamentally reshape aviation safety for aging fleets. This investigation has revealed that our entire approach to aircraft life extension needs recalibration, concludes NTSB Chair Blackwood in the report's executive summary. The assumptions, testing parameters, and inspection protocols developed for an aircraft's original service life may become dangerously inadequate when that aircraft flies for decades beyond its intended retirement. For the families of the Louisville victims, the report brings a measure of validation, if not comfort. The NTSB definitively concluded that nothing the crew did or failed to do contributed to the accident. Captain Hendricks, First Officer Chen, and Flight Engineer Martinez responded in a textbook manner to an unsurvivable situation. The report specifically praises their extraordinary professionalism under extreme duress as they fought to control the aircraft until the final moments. The industry response has been swift and comprehensive. Boeing, which acquired McDonnell Douglas in 1997, has established a $50 million fund to support research into aging aircraft safety, independent of its legal obligations to accident victims. Cargo carriers have accelerated fleet renewal plans, with FedEx and UPS announcing multi-billion-dollar orders for new freighter aircraft. The FAA has implemented interim inspection requirements for all commercial aircraft operating beyond 75% of their original design life. Perhaps most significantly, the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, has formed a special committee on extended service life that will establish new global standards for the certification and maintenance of aircraft operating beyond their original design parameters. These standards are expected to include more rigorous fatigue testing, enhanced monitoring systems, and specialized training for maintenance personnel. The Louisville crash has triggered the most significant re-examination of aging aircraft safety since the 1988 Aloha Airlines incident, says aviation historian Dr. Margaret Chen, referring to the famous case where a Boeing 737 suffered explosive decompression due to metal fatigue, leading to major changes in inspection requirements. But while Aloha focused on structural integrity, Louisville is forcing us to look at complex systems and their interactions over extraordinarily long service lives. For everyday air travelers, the implications may be invisible but significant. Passenger aircraft typically operate for 20-25 years before retirement, well within their designed service lives. But the findings from the MD-11 investigation are already influencing how these aircraft are maintained and monitored during their operational lifespans. The most profound impact may be on the global air cargo system, which has historically relied on converted passenger aircraft for economic efficiency. As enhanced inspection and maintenance requirements drive up the costs of operating aging freighters, shipping prices may increase, affecting everything from e-commerce deliveries to global supply chains. For aviation professionals, the Louisville disaster serves as a sobering reminder that even in an industry obsessed with safety, blind spots can develop. The triple redundant hydraulic system of the MD-11, once considered a robust safety feature, created a false sense of security that may have delayed the discovery of its fatal flaw. There's a lesson here about humility in engineering, reflects Dr. James Chen. We design systems to be fail-safe, but we can never anticipate every possible failure mode, especially those that emerge only after decades of real-world operation. The best safety systems are those that continuously question their own assumptions. As the sun sets over the memorial recently dedicated at Louisville International Airport, 3 granite pillars representing the lost crew members, the aviation community continues to absorb the lessons of Flight 2976. The disaster has already transformed how we think about aging aircraft safety. The challenge now is ensuring these lessons remain at the forefront as new aircraft designs enter service, potentially operating for decades beyond our current horizon of understanding. For Captain Hendricks, First Officer Chen, and Flight Engineer Martinez, the legacy is clear. Their final flight revealed a hidden danger that might otherwise have claimed more lives. In aviation's constant balance between progress and safety, their sacrifice has permanently tipped the scales toward greater protection for all who fly. If this investigation has taught us anything, it's that in aviation safety, what we don't know, what we don't even know to look for, can be the most dangerous threat of all. For an industry built on redundancy and certainty, embracing that uncertainty may be its most important evolution yet. Share this video with anyone interested in aviation safety or engineering design. The lessons from UPS Flight 2976 extend far beyond the aviation community. They speak to how we approach risk, aging infrastructure, and system safety in an increasingly complex world.